It's the start of a new month, so it's time to do my October and November wrap-up because I didn't do a wrap-up for October or November. But I read a total of 8 books between these 2 months. It was a month where I got in a reading slump, then I got out of a reading slump. So let's talk about all the books that I have read in the past 2 months. The first book I read was That Kind of Hype by Stephanie Archer. This is the first book in the Queen's Cove series by the author, and I have read the Vancouver Storm series by the same author, and I really love the series, so I decided to give The Kind of Guy a chance. And it was fun. It was a fun, fluffy rom-com, a good palate cleanser, and I think That Kind of Guy just needed to be a little bit longer and it would have been better. Then I read Hyperion by Dan Simmons, and this is a book that I really like the world building. I didn't like the experience of reading this book, and I'm not continuing with the series. I just didn't like the experience, and I'm not curious enough about the sequel to justify continue reading the series. Then I read The Flasher by Bev O'Leary. In the past I read The No Show by the same author around 2 years ago, and I really enjoyed it, and I decided to give The Flasher a go because I already had it on my TBR and I was deep in a reading slump by this point. And turns out I really enjoyed The Flasher, and this book kind of saved me from a reading slump. I personally really like the characters and the relationship, and also this is just a quintessential British rom-com, and it just felt kind of nostalgic for me. Then I read Six Scorched Roses by Carissa Broadbent. This is a novella that comes between The Serpent and the Wings of Night and The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. I believe it's the name of the third book in the Crowns on Axia series, but Six Scorched Roses is a novella that you can read as a standalone, and I just love this book. I binged read it. It took me like a day. It took me one sitting to finish reading this book. It's one of my favorite books of the year, and I just really like the yearning and the characters. And while I really love The Serpent and the Wings of Night, that book's a little bit more dark, while Six Scorched Roses is way more romantic. And then I read Not in Love because I was craving reading something very different because I didn't want to fall in a reading slump again. And Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood was one of those books that was on my TBR for quite some time, and I really enjoyed that one. I really tend to like Ali Hazelwood's books. They just do something to my brain, and Not in Love did something to my brain. I really enjoyed it, even though it is a little bit spicier than Ali Hazelwood's usual books. And then I read Red Rising by Pierce Brown, another book that has been on my TBR for multiple years, and I also really loved it because turns out I had a really great few weeks of reading in November, and I just love Red Rising. I love the writing style, I love the world building, I love the characters and just how the story was told, and I'm really curious about the next books in the series. And then to end my great reading week, I read a not very great book. I read Tell Me How You Hate Me by Callie Mel. This is a book that has been showing up on my Kindle homepage. It has been suggested for me on my Kindle homepage practically the whole year, and at one point I was just curious and I just wanted to see why this book was always showing up on my homepage, even though it's not a particularly popular book and I have never heard anyone talking about it. And turns out I really didn't like this book. I didn't like the characters, I didn't like the writing style, I didn't like the story, and this book felt like it felt very American, but in the way that it felt like a very bad Hallmark movie. In that sense that it felt very American. It just at this time with a nonsensical name, and it's not even a funny nonsensical name. It's just a very bad Hallmark movie nonsensical name for a small town that sometimes doesn't even feel like a small town. So I really didn't like Tell Me How You Hate Me. And then to end November, I decided to read a short novella. I decided to read The Fall Risk by Abby Jimenez. This was me giving Abby Jimenez a second chance because I read Part of Your World by the author last year, and for me that book, while I do understand why some people love it, for me it just felt very meh. But The Fall Risk is a very short novella that follows these 2 characters. They live in this apartment building, and one day they leave their apartment and they find out that the builders accidentally knocked out their stairs, so they are essentially stranded in their apartments for a whole weekend. And this is a short romantic novella, and this Abby Jimenez, it deals with some heavier topics, mostly because the female main character, she has a stalker, and for a short novella I think it was great. Not my favorite book ever, but for a short novella it was great. And yes, now I feel more comfortable giving Abby Jimenez and reading other books by Abby Jimenez a chance. So that's all the books I read between October and November. And what about you? What have you read?